Okay. Thank you, Blake. Like Blake said, my name is Alex. It's an honor to be up here. Just going to get situated here. Okay. So I want to talk about faith that obeys. Trusting God even when it doesn't make sense. What does that mean? Even if we don't always do it, we know how to obey God when it makes sense. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not have idols. Sure, it makes sense. We don't want to harm others, and we don't want to glorify earthly things. Great. Easy to obey. Got it. But how can we obey him when it doesn't make sense? The book of Joshua has a great example. And I'm going to set this up for Joshua 6, 1 through 5. Jericho is a city that's situated just west of the Jordan River. It was part of the land God promised to Moses, and then after Moses died, to Joshua. The Israelites are sitting outside Jericho, and they're ready to take it. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in. March around Jericho's walls once per day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, march around the walls 7 times, blowing trumpets. This is not how a soldier is trained to fight wars. Nevertheless, the soldiers obeyed." And we'll catch up with them in verse 15. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They were asked to obey in an unlikely way, and it made all the difference. We're going to look at one more example. This is Luke 5, 1 through 7. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. Again, it doesn't really make sense. These fishermen have been working all night, and they've caught nothing, not a mackerel. And Joe Schmo, a carpenter, not a fisherman, tells them to cast their nets one more time. They begrudgingly obey, and it may be the largest catch that they have ever seen. In fact, it was such a large catch that they just abandoned being fishermen. They left their job to follow Jesus. God will call on each of us to obey, even when it doesn't make sense. Last June, I got this overwhelming urge to give an old coworker of mine $500 by Christmas. Now, if you know me, that doesn't sound like me for a number of reasons. I don't go around handing out money. Secondly, I'm not thinking about Christmas in June. But I was sitting in church Sunday morning, listening to the sermon on a hot summer day, and it was like God was telling me to do this. Also, I haven't seen this guy in 2.5 years. I never hung out with him. I didn't have his number. This wasn't going to be easy and made no sense for a number of reasons. The only thing I remembered about him was how he talked about his faith at work constantly. This whole notion caught me so off guard that I wrote it into my notes app in my phone, and then I forgot about it. Sometimes I would think, oh crap, I should do that, and then I would forget again. You guys, this happened all the way until Christmas Eve. The deadline of before Christmas was now haunting me. My own fault, of course. So I drove 40 minutes on Christmas Eve to my old job to give this man a Christmas card with money in it. Now, I don't tell you this story so that you say, wow, Alex is a great and upstanding guy. Please, nobody ask me for money after this. But that's how important it is for me to tell you about this type of obedience, to obey even when it doesn't make perfect sense, when it's hard or inconvenient. Now, the two examples that I gave in the Bible, we have the benefit of knowing the end result. The walls come down and the Israelites take Jericho. The nets were overflowing with fish. My story doesn't have that resolution. My story is still ongoing, and it's not wrapped in a pretty bow. But that's faith and that's obedience. Now, the old coworker did call me before I got home in sheer disbelief, and then he texted me a voice memo in February that I still have on my phone, and he was talking about how he'd been able to bless others with what I gave him. And that was pretty cool. However, I may never fully understand what that act of obedience meant, but I'm glad I did it. I'd like to challenge you all. Listen to that little voice in your head next time it asks for obedience in an unlikely way. Lean into doing something a little weird and off the wall if you know it's coming from a godly place. I promise you won't regret it. Thanks.